All right, welcome back, class. We're going to go over a couple housekeeping items first. Hopefully you can all see the Canvas calendar. And I'm just going to go over what's coming up in the next couple weeks. Tonight, you can see the lab pages that are due throughout the rest of the semester. I don't really have due dates on those because I know some of you do them when you're able to. So I'll give you like a couple weeks to do them, and then I'll just put a 0 in if you don't give it to me by then. Your next quiz will be on the nervous system, and if you guys look at your lab exam study sheet that I have right here, this is for lab exam, your 4th lab checklist. Your quiz will just be on parts A, B, and C. So the neuron model, the brain and cranial nerve section, so the whole first page, and then just through the spinal cord section. So that's what'll be your quiz will be on. That'll be on Canvas. It'll be picture-based, multiple choice. So that will be on Tuesday. I'll open up that quiz at 8 p.m. on Tuesday and leave it open for 24 hours. And then on Tuesday, if you can see here, we're also going to have the Chapter 19 Zoom live lecture at 7. And we're probably also going to go through your your lecture exam 3 study guide, because your next lecture exam is on Thursday, April 30th for this unit. That study guide is on Canvas. We'll go through it. You can ask questions. That might get to be like a longer Zoom session, but I'll record the lecture separate from the study session if you can only come in for some of it, or if you want to pop in and pop out. I won't take offense to that. So what else? Then your next lecture exam is on Thursday. Questions about any of that? Okay.
You said you're going to open it up at 8 p.m., the quiz?
Yeah, I'm going to open up the quiz at 8 p.m. on Tuesday.
Okay.
And I'll leave it open up probably till midnight the following day.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I'll leave it open for 24 hours, plus I'll just make it due at midnight, yeah. Okay. So we'll just get through the next 2 weeks, and then the month of May is really our last unit for a lecture. Your next lab exam won't be until May 14th, and that'll include your heart and blood vessels as well. So we won't get to your next lab exam for a while yet. Okay, so let me share this PowerPoint with you. And I just wrote a couple notes on here about what's coming up. So on Tuesday, it's a big night. You'll have your nervous system quiz, the live Zoom lecture on Chapter 19, which is special senses, and then we'll have a study session for the lecture exam 3. If you want to join us for all of that, you're welcome to, or if you want to pop in and out, that's okay too. Okay, so this chapter is on your autonomic nervous system. And autonomic means automatically, so things that happen on a subconscious level. So hopefully you might have your notes printed out in front of you. This chapter is just not, the nervous system, as you know, is kind of abstract because there's a lot of small details in it. So I try to make your notes really relevant to what you'll be tested on and what you should focus your studying on. So the first couple notes, sorry if you can hear cars behind me. I left my garage door open a little bit because it's getting hot in here. Let's review the differences between your somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, which is what we're going to focus on tonight. Your somatic nervous system works on processes that are perceived or controlled consciously. So the sensory part of it involves what you hear, what you see, what you touch. Proprioception is the relative knowledge of your body and space to each other. And the motor part of the somatic nervous system involves control of skeletal muscles. So somatic nervous system, everything consciously perceived and voluntary controlled. Then your autonomic nervous system, which is what we focus on tonight, is a motor system regulating processes below the conscious level to maintain homeostasis. And again, homeostasis is just the ability of your body to maintain a constant internal environment. So it'll reflexively respond to visceral sensory inputs, such as when your blood vessels stretch. That will change maybe how much your heart will pump. and it'll send impulses to control your heart, cardiac muscle, other smooth muscle throughout your body and your lungs, your digestive system, and all of your glands. So that autonomic nervous system is things we're going to focus on tonight. So this is a look at a little bit more of the differences, kind of what I talked you through. The somatic sensory neuron in the somatic nervous system picks up some sort of sensory receptor. For example, this is in the skin, and it enters into the spinal cord in the backside, in the posterior root, and then out the anterior root comes the motor response, which will control the skeletal muscle. So for example, if you touch a hot stove, your skin sensory receptor it's a really quick reflex that doesn't even go up to your brain, and it'll tell your skeletal muscle, your arm or your forearm muscles, to take off your arm right away from the receptor. The autonomic nervous system then, in difference to that again, are things that are not consciously perceived. So things that are happening inside of your body that you're not unaware of. So an example of this picture is showing a sensory neuron detecting different stimuli associated with blood vessels and viscera, which are your organs, sending out a response, entering the spinal cord in the back, and then coming out the front with the motor response to control or change things in your viscera and smooth muscle and glands to maintain homeostasis. Okay, so I'm trying to wonder, maybe this is where I want you to, I think in somatic nervous system, that first part of your notes, I just give you a couple of blanks to write in your own notes about what the somatic nervous system is. So simply put, it's a single lower motor neuron axon that extends from the spinal cord to skeletal muscle fibers. So we're talking about the motor neurons. And the motor neuron has a large myelinated axon and releases acetylcholine to stimulate the muscle. Acetylcholine is just a type of neurotransmitter that works to stimulate muscle cells in the motor response in the somatic nervous system. And then in the autonomic nervous system, there's always a 2-neuron chain, meaning 2 nerve cells will work together to innervate involuntary muscles and glands. And we call these neurons preganglionic and postganglionic or ganglionic neurons. And I'll explain what that means in a second. Okay, so let's look at these 2 neurons in the autonomic nervous system. So the 2-neuron system, so these are motor neurons. This just means that there's always 2 neurons that will help to communicate whatever motor response we want from an effector organ. And I know this is a lot of physiology, so I'll try to not explain too much of this. But the 2 neurons, we call the first neuron the preganglionic neuron. And that's the neuron before a synapse occurs that releases the neurotransmitter. This ganglionic neuron cell body is some sort of bulge within your spinal nerves where you'll see this neurotransmitter released. And that neurotransmitter will get picked up by the postganglionic axon or neuron to continue that signal to the effector organ, whether that's your cardiac, your heart muscle, your smooth muscle, or your gland. So this picture is just depicting the preganglionic neuron, preganglia, before the ganglia, where that synapse occurs and the exchange of acetylcholine gets transferred, and the postganglionic neuron. So those are the 2. We'll talk about underneath number 2 in your notes. It's going to ask which one is myelinated and which one is unmyelinated. And just by looking at this picture, you can see that your preganglionic axon has myelin around it. So the preganglionic axon is the myelinated axon, and the postganglionic axon is never myelinated, so it never has myelin surrounding it. And this slide will explain that. So the first neuron in your ANS pathway is your preganglionic neuron. Its cell body is in the brain or the spinal cord, and it will always be myelinated. it will extend to the second cell where acetylcholine will excite the second neuron. And the second neuron in the path is called the ganglionic neuron or postganglionic axon. And the postganglionic axon will extend to the effector cells. And the postganglionic axon will always be unmyelinated. So myelinated goes with preganglionic axon, and unmyelinated goes with postganglionic axon. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Okay, having these two neurons communicating helps to control just the cause and effect of the whole nervous system a lot better. And that's due to neuronal convergence and neuronal divergence. And you should know what these two mean. If you know what the word converge means and diverge mean, these should be easy to think about just matter-of-factly. But neuronal convergence are when axons from numerous preganglionic cells will converge or synapse on a single ganglionic cell. So that's neuronal convergence. They synapse and converge on one ganglia. And neuronal divergence are when we have axons from one preganglionic cell that synapse on numerous ganglionic cells. So they would diverge onto numerous ganglionic cells. So that's your next couple notes under number 2 for B and C. Neuronal convergence and neuronal divergence, what that means. Okay. Then we'll spend a majority of this chapter talking about your parasympathetic and your sympathetic division. These are two main functional differences in your autonomic nervous system. Your parasympathetic division we call the rest and digest division of your autonomic nervous system. So again, these divisions are happening automatically, subconsciously. You're not aware of these things going on. The sympathetic division prepares your body for emergencies, and we call that the fight or flight division. And it increases alertness and makes nutrients available for use. In a situation, your sympathetic division would be kind of triggered or turned on if you're in a basketball game and you're down to the final seconds and the score is tied, or if you're in an anatomy exam and you're really stressed out. Your sympathetic division would prepare your body for that emergency by increasing your body's alertness. It would dilate your pupils so that you're able to take in as much light and be aware of your surroundings. It would make nutrients available for use, so it would break down sugar and glucose into energy sources. Your sympathetic division would increase your heart rate, so increase your blood, the ability of your heart to pump blood to parts of the body. Comparing that to your parasympathetic division, this helps conserve energy and replenish nutrient stores. So your parasympathetic division would be active after you eat a big Thanksgiving meal, Christmas meal, when you're asleep at night. This is your rest and digest division. So during your parasympathetic division activation, you have a lot of blood supply headed to your gut to help digest your food. And your heart rate would slow down, so rest and digest. So we'll talk a lot about these differences now. We can talk about their differences by the length of their axons, the number of preganglionic axon branches, and the location of the ganglia. And these three are the letters A, B, and C under Roman numerals 3 and Roman numerals 4 in your notes. So you can see your notes here. Roman numeral 3 is parasympathetic and Roman numeral 4 is sympathetic. And A, B, and C list and kind of take you through the length of the axons, the number, and the location of ganglia for each of them. So you guys can quickly write down notes or come back and look at it later, but your parasympathetic preganglionic axons are long and the postganglionic axons are short. And I'll show you a picture of what this means. And sympathetic is just the opposite. Their preganglionic axons are short and their postganglionic axons are long. Number of preganglionic axon branches. Parasympathetic preganglionic axons have few branches. Sympathetic preganglionic axons have many. Location of the ganglia. And again, a ganglia is where that synapse occurs, where the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is, or other neurotransmitter, is released to go to the postganglionic axon. The parasympathetic ganglia are close to the effector. The effector is the part of the body that it's controlling. And the sympathetic ganglia are near the spinal cord. And the sympathetic ganglia you can see under the, with just your naked eye. If we were to dissect a cadaver, you could see sympathetic ganglia traveling on either side of the spinal cord. And I'll show you a picture of that too. Okay, so this takes you a little bit through the differences between the length of their axons, the number of axons. You can see the differences. In orange are the parasympathetic division. We call the parasympathetic division your craniosacral division, and that's because its spinal nerves come out of the spinal cord close to the cranium and close to the sacrum. And you can see here under the parasympathetic division how it has very long preganglionic axons and short postganglionic axons. I know a lot of this is like, why do I even have to know this? So just bear with me, we'll get through it. Again, the preganglionic axons have the myelin around them and the postganglionic axons do not. Then your sympathetic division we call the thoracocolumbar division, because its spinal nerves come out of the thoracic region of your spinal column and also the lumbar region of the spinal column. So you can see that part is in blue. So those are some differences there. Okay. Here is a comparison. The function of each: rest and digest, parasympathetic, fight or flight, sympathetic, where the neuron cell bodies are located, and kind of a little bit of the degree of response. But all you need to know, again, focus. I know there's like really weird information in this chapter that's probably really abstract. So that's why I try to make these notes as specific as I can for what you guys should focus on. So parasympathetic is termed craniosacral because your preganglionic neurons are housed in the brainstem. And also S2 to S4, which is your sacral spinal cord segments. The ganglionic neurons are in either terminal ganglia close to the target organ or intramural ganglia in the wall of the target organ. Sorry, you can hear neighbors and dogs behind me. So here's an overview of parasympathetic pathways coming off of some of the cranial nerves close to the cranium or the brainstem, and also coming off of the sacral region. So this is just an overview of the pathways, and a pathway is just the direction that nerve impulses travel between some sort of sensory stimuli and then the motor response. So I do want you to know, in this picture, you can see up near the cranial region, there's 4 cranial nerves that the parasympathetic pathway uses for its motor response. And those 4 cranial nerves are listed in your notes, or you have to fill them in. And these 4 cranial nerves associated with the parasympathetic division are the oculomotor nerve, your facial nerve, your glossopharyngeal nerve, and your vagus nerve. You guys don't need to really know the numbers. I'll always have the name listed with the number. But you should know that these are the 4 cranial nerves associated with your parasympathetic division. And we'll go through each of them now. The oculomotor nerve is housed in your midbrain. What your oculomotor nerve does is it helps to control the constrictor muscle of your iris. So it helps with near vision. So this is your oculomotor nerve. It helps to control the constrictor muscle of the iris. So it helps with near vision. Then your facial nerve. The facial nerve, if you watched the lecture from last time, the facial cranial nerve has a lot to do with your salivary glands and your lacrimal glands. So it increases saliva secretions and lacrimal secretions in your nose, mouth, and palate. So it makes sense that your facial nerve is part of your parasympathetic division, because remember, your parasympathetic division is all about rest and digest. So increased salivation, increased secretion from glands just helps with that digestion piece of the parasympathetic. The glossopharyngeal nerve helps to increase secretions from the parotid salivary gland. We'll learn about these glands when we get to the digestive system, but the parotid salivary gland is one of the main glands in secreting saliva just into your mouth. So this is the glossopharyngeal nerve. And then the vagus nerve, this activity branches to some of the thoracic organs in your thorax to increase mucus production, decreases airway diameter in your lungs, and decreases your heart rate. So the vagus nerves helps to decrease airway diameter. So why does that make sense that your airways in your lungs would decrease when you're resting and digesting? Does anyone have any ideas? When your airways are decreased, when you're just asleep or resting and digesting, you don't need constant inflow of air into your lungs. The opposite happens in your sympathetic nervous system. When you're stressed out or you're trying to run away from something, or you're in a high stress situation, your airways will actually increase diameter to try to get more airflow into your lungs and more oxygen delivered. Decreasing your heart rate by the vagus nerve is part of your rest and digest parasympathetic, because your heart rate doesn't need to be increased when you're resting. So the force of contraction decreases as well. Activity in these vagus nerve branches also go to your abdominal organs to help increase smooth muscle motility and secretory activity in your digestive tract. That just means that they'll help things move along as you're getting ready to digest a meal. So this is a little about those 4 cranial nerves. The splanchnic nerves are just the ones associated with the sacral region. Okay, let's get to the sympathetic division, also called the thoracocolumbar division, because the cell bodies are housed in either the thoracic through the second lumbar spinal segments. And let's get to, here's an overview of the sympathetic pathways. Again, the sympathetic pathways are all involved in fight or flight. So your fight or flight response would be increased heart rate, increased bronchial diameter. So again, the bronchioles are your airways in your lungs, and they will increase in diameter to try to get airflow, increased force of contractions from your heart. So this is the sympathetic pathway. Okay. Sympathetic trunks are located anterior to the spinal nerves, immediately lateral to the vertebral column. And the sympathetic trunk ganglia house the sympathetic ganglionic neuron cell bodies. And one sympathetic ganglion is typically associated with each spinal nerve. I'm just going to pull up this picture one more time, because your sympathetic trunk ganglia, I think, is one of your things listed in your spinal cord. Maybe not actually, but your sympathetic trunk ganglia looks like it's this ladder, or yeah, it looks like a ladder that runs parallel to the spinal cord itself, and it has these little bulges. Those are the ganglia of your sympathetic nervous system. Okay, I'm gonna skip over this. Here you can also see the sympathetic trunk ganglia. Here is your superior vena cava, descending thoracic aorta. You can't really see the spinal cord very well, but you can see the sympathetic trunk here, located kind of in the back of the body. So that houses your sympathetic axons, or sympathetic cell bodies, excuse me. Is everyone with me so far? Usually I say, is everyone awake? But I can't see you guys. So.
So did we already answer D, sympathetic trunk ganglia? What are we writing for that?
Just here, I'll pull up this. Just you should know that the sympathetic trunk ganglia house the sympathetic ganglionic neuron cell bodies. So the sympathetic trunk ganglia, and they're located lateral to the vertebral column. So just kind of where they're located. So the trunk is located directly lateral to the vertebral column on either side. And the sympathetic trunk ganglia house the sympathetic ganglionic neuron cell bodies. That's all you need to know about that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Professor. Can you say one more time? They house the sympathetic. I didn't hear it. Oh,
nope, that's okay. So the sympathetic trunks are located just lateral to your vertebral column.
I have that,
And then the trunk, the ganglia themselves, which are just the places where they bulge out a little bit, so they look like little circles, they will have your sympathetic ganglia neuron cell body. So it's basically where the cell bodies are located, not the axons, but just the cell bodies of those sympathetic neurons.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Then we have white rami and gray rami. So the rami just refers, I need another picture here, and I don't have one. So these axons are entering in and out of the spinal cord, and the rami just refer to a part of the axon itself. They can be white or gray, and all you need to know is that the white means it's myelinated, and the gray means it's unmyelinated or it lacks myelin. And that's true for wherever you go in the nervous system. If you have white matter or a white rami, which is just part of a spinal nerve, that reflects that that nerve is myelinated. So white equals myelination, and gray means no myelin or unmyelinated. So that's all you need to know about the white and gray rami. In the white and gray rami, they just connect the spinal nerves themselves to other neuron branches. And they can just be myelinated or unmyelinated. Okay. Let me see here where we are. Splanchnic nerves, so we're still in the sympathetic part. The splanchnic nerves typically terminate in prevertebral ganglia, and they cluster around arteries and are named after these arteries. And I include these because these arteries are important branches off of your descending aorta that we'll get to next unit. So I just want you to know a little bit, not a whole lot, what these splanchnic nerves innervate. So that's why under G, splanchnic nerves cluster around the arteries. We're going to look at what each one's innervate really quick. Celiac ganglion are adjacent to the celiac artery, and they will innervate parts of your stomach, spleen, liver, gallbladder. Your proximal duodenum is the first part of your small intestine and a part of your pancreas. So I know we haven't done digestive system yet, but the celiac ganglia innervate kind of the first part of your digestive system. Once we pass the diaphragm, your stomach is there first, your spleen, your liver, your gallbladder, those are all more in the upper half of your abdominal cavity. And the celiac ganglia innervate those top parts of your digestive system first. So that's your celiac postganglionic axons. Okay, I know, are any of you guys writing this down? I don't want to go too fast. Okay, superior mesenteric ganglion, I've underlined what these postganglionic axons innervate. As we're working our way down your abdominal cavity, these will innervate kind of the middle part of your digestive tract. Your distal duodenum is a little bit further down your small intestine tract. a part of your pancreas, the rest of your small intestine, and then the first part of your large intestine, all of your kidneys, and the first part of your ureters. And your ureters just take your urine from your kidneys to your bladder. So that's the superior mesenteric ganglia. And these words, celiac ganglia, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric, they're named because they'll follow and originate close to where these major arteries are. And these are three of the only main artery branches that come off your descending aorta. Okay, and then inferior mesenteric ganglia, this will innervate the rest of your digestive tract. So now we're getting towards the end of your digestive system, getting close to expulsion or excretion. So the distal part of your large intestine or colon, your rectum, which is the place where you excrete the waste, your urinary bladder, the rest of your distal ureter, and also most of your reproductive organs. Because your reproductive organs are found closer to the base of your pelvic region, so they're included in organs that these nerves or ganglia innervate to. Is everyone kind of with me so far?
Yup.
Who said that? I couldn't hear you.
Edgar.
Edgar.
Yes.
Edgar, welcome.
Hello.
How's the baby?
He's getting big.
How old is he now?
He's gonna be 9 months.
Wow,
Yup, time flies.
for sure.
How's your pregnancy coming along?
It's good. I'm getting big.
Nice. It's always a good sign.
I know. I have a reason because that's all we're doing inside, right? Eating and
Yeah.
so.
I'm just isolated from everybody right now.
Are you working in like a clinic or a hospital, Edgar?
A hospital.
That's right.
I
Okay.
work. Yeah, I work directly with people with COVID. So
Oh, you do?
yeah. Yeah. I work in the
Kudos to
radiology
you,
department. What?
So kudos to you.
Yeah, I work in the radiology department at a hospital. It's called PIH Health in Downey. And I'm the assistant to all the MRI, CAT scan, ultrasound, and nuclear medicine. And, you know, a lot of these people are getting procedures done for COVID. And it's crazy. I mean, stuff is pretty real over there.
So are they all COVID patients?
No, we have our COVID designated units.
Okay.
And,
Great.
but I'm not really allowed to like speak too much about it because
Yeah, I understand that.
So,
Yeah.
but I do, yeah. So I
And
just try to stay away from everybody.
You're really on the front lines. Thanks, Edgar.
Yeah, no problem. It's pretty hectic.
Yeah, I bet. PH, yeah, I'm giving birth at PH in Whittier.
Oh, really? I work right here in Downey.
Yeah, I've been there, I think. Yeah.
And that would have been pretty cool. I'll probably stop by Whittier and say hi.
You won't be able to come in and see me. My own kids can't even come and see me. Now
Well, I mean, I have access to the family birth center, so.
Can you sneak in my kids so they can come see me?
Maybe. I'm not sick, but you know.
Oh.
Sometimes I do have to go to Whittier.
Okay. Well, thanks for all you do, Edgar. Oh man.
No problem. That's what I got hired for, I guess.
Yeah. All right. A little bit of a break there.
Yeah.
I need that. Thanks, guys.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of you guys are working right on the front lines too. All right. So now a little bit of the effects and functions of your sympathetic division. In crisis situations, we call mass activation occurs. So you can kind of jump to the next page of your notes, and an increase in the following occurs, and it gives you 5 things there, and I write them down for you. So again, sympathetic division, fight or flight, getting the body ready for an emergency situation. So mass activation, your body will simultaneously stimulate many of these effectors all at the same time. All of a sudden, your alertness is increased. all of a sudden you have energy available. So that means that probably glucose was broken down from fat reserves. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases because the heart is pumping more blood out, and your breathing rate and depth increase because your airways have increased diameter, or we call that bronchodilation, when your airways dilate and they increase diameter. So these are all things that occur in mass activation. And you guys can recognize that right away. You think of that part of, adrenaline causes some of these things too, or helps that. But if you're in just some sort of stressful situation, or you got to like get someone out of a burning building, if you're a firefighter, you just have to do that, all these things would occur. So this is mass activation as a part of your sympathetic division. Okay. Then we'll talk a little bit about autonomic plexuses. And a plexus is any collection of axons, whether they're sympathetic, parasympathetic, and visceral sensory axons. And these plexuses are located throughout the body. And again, it's just a collection of neuron axons. So just where you have a collection of nerves, basically. You have a cardiac plexus, a pulmonary plexus, and an esophageal plexus. And we're going to go over what would occur in sympathetic and parasympathetic activity to each of those plexuses. Okay, so the cardiac plexus is in your mediastinum, so it's in your thoracic cavity. The mediastinum is where your heart is located. It consists of sympathetic axons in it. So if we have increased sympathetic activity of your cardiac plexus, that will increase your heart rate and blood pressure. And if we have increased parasympathetic activity, meaning your parasympathetic activity gets turned on, that will decrease the heart rate. Because in parasympathetic activity, you're resting and you're digesting, so your heart rate will slow down. So these are just plexus. A plexus is just a collection of nerves or axons, whether they're parasympathetic or sympathetic, and how they control the area around which they're located. Okay, so what do you guys think? Pulmonary plexus has to do with your lungs. So the axons from these nerves will branch to your bronchi, and the bronchi are just branches off of your trachea or your airways, and also to blood vessels of the lungs. So sympathetic innervation causes bronchodilation, and bronchodilation means it's a dilation of those bronchioles, and the bronchioles are just the branches off of your trachea, also known as just your airways that travel throughout your lungs. So in sympathetic fight or flight, your bronchioles will dilate, they'll increase in diameter to get more airflow, more oxygen being delivered to your bloodstream. Parasympathetic stimulation will reduce bronchial diameter, and we call that bronchoconstriction. It will also increase mucus secretions in the bronchial tree. Mucus in your lungs just helps to trap everything bad that you could be breathing in. So you should know what bronchodilation means and what bronchoconstriction means, and which one, sympathetic activity or parasympathetic activity, would increase each of those. So sympathetic activity would increase bronchodilation, getting your airway open, and parasympathetic activity will increase bronchoconstriction, or, I mean, they're not really constricting, they're just being brought back to normal size. Okay? Then esophageal plexus, we really just kind of talk about parasympathetic activity, and it just coordinates smooth muscle activity during swallowing. So it just helps to swallow. And that makes sense because it's part of your digest system. All right, then we get to a little bit of overview of neurotransmitters. And a neurotransmitter is anything that's released from a preganglionic axon to send off the signal to the postganglionic axon or ganglionic cell. The main autonomic nervous system neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and that is labeled or abbreviated ACH right here. So acetylcholine ACH is the main ANS neurotransmitter. We're going to go through different physiological slides here that you don't need to know. I just want you to know that acetylcholine is the main neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine gets released to the postganglionic axon. It can cause excitation of the axon or inhibition depending on what type of receptor it binds to. A muscarinic and nicotinic are different receptors that acetylcholine will bind to. Acetylcholine release from sympathetic axons will only excite them. And most postganglionic sympathetic axons release a different neurotransmitter, norepinephrine. Just gonna kind of go over this because this is just a brief overview, but acetylcholine is the main one that's released. You can see here in between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic pathway, again, these preganglionic axons are releasing little tiny neurotransmitters. And again, just think of these little pink dots as the cell's way to communicate the signal with each other. So your nerves are communicating with each other by sending out these neurotransmitters that will get attached to receptors on the nerve next to it, and it will continue that signal sent down. Really simply put. Autonomic tone. This is sustained activity in both divisions. That's an autonomic tone that regulates the target organs. The activity level of just one division, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic, can regulate an effector organ. So if sympathetic activity decreases from where it should be, then blood vessels will dilate. If sympathetic activity increases, they will constrict. So autonomic tone just means trying to keep everything baseline across the board. Dual innervation, I think I have this next in your notes. Dual innervation just means that many of your effectors receive input from both divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. And we already saw that because your heart rate or your heart is dually innervated by the sympathetic, which will increase heart rate, and the parasympathetic will decrease heart rate. Your bronchioles in your lungs are innervated by both. The divisions can oppose each other or cooperate with each other. And the antagonistic effects just means that they'll have opposite effects of each other. And we've been through this a little bit already, but the parasympathetic activity will slow your heart rate down. Your sympathetic activity speeds it up. Parasympathetic activity increases your intestines' ability to digest, and your sympathetic activity decreases it because in a fight or flight situation, you're not worried about digesting the food in your gut. And then the parasympathetic activity constricts your pupil size. So we'll talk about the pupil on Tuesday with the eye, but your pupil is the black dot in your eye that can get smaller and larger, and parasympathetic activity constricts it and gets it smaller. Sympathetic activity dilates your pupil, so it's much larger. And that's the way that light and images get into your eye. So your sympathetic activity wants to dilate your pupil size so that you can be very aware of your surroundings and take in as much of your surroundings as possible. So that is dual innervation. And I guess there were several notes there for you to fill in under the antagonistic effects, but hopefully you guys filled those in as we were going there under the little numbers 1, 2, and 3. Systems controlled only by the sympathetic nervous system. Some are only controlled by the sympathetic. What was number 2 again? Thanks, Enrique. Let me just go back. So number 2, parasympathetic activity increases intestinal motility. That means it increases what's going through your intestines, and sympathetic activity decreases it. Does that answer your question, Enrique? Okay, thanks. All right, so some effectors are controlled by an increase or decrease in sympathetic activity compared to baseline. And an example of this is just looking at blood vessels will dilate with decreased sympathetic activity and constrict with increased activity. Your blood vessels are all of your arteries and veins in your body, and they will constrict with increased sympathetic activity to try to increase blood pressure in the body itself. Sweat secretion, adrenal hormone secretion, and the rector pili muscle contraction all vary directly with your sympathetic tone as well. And again, when we're talking about sympathetic tone, we're talking about keeping activity baseline as much as possible, except in some sort of situation that would increase sympathetic activity. Okay, we'll finish with autonomic reflexes here. Involuntary autonomic reflexes help maintain homeostasis. They consist of smooth muscle contractions, cardiac muscle contraction, gland secretion, or in response to a stimulus. And one example is moment-to-moment control of your blood pressure, which is a very sensitive and really fascinating control system in your body. But you have baroreceptors located in your aorta. So when blood first leaves the aorta, it can sense the blood pressure and change the way your heart is contracting or how much blood is being released based on what your blood pressure is. So this is a type of autonomic reflex, involuntary, and it just helps to maintain homeostasis throughout your body. So if you're lying down and you sit up straight or sit up quick and you feel really lightheaded, your body will notice that automatically and start to increase your blood pressure and increase blood flow. The last one we'll talk about is just the urinary bladder autonomic reflex. I know you're probably thinking, well, we control when we go to the bathroom, but this autonomic reflex refers to the smooth muscle itself of the bladder. As your urinary bladder stretches, as it's filling with urine, that stretching of the smooth muscle stimulates a receptor that tells your brain that your bladder is full and your bladder will start to empty. What you guys and what we all control is the sphincter, which opens and closes, which allows the urine to leave the bladder. But the bladder, the idea of emptying the bladder and contracting that smooth muscle in your bladder has an autonomic reflex response, which is kind of interesting. So we will end there, and I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording here.